v. Board of Education was a landmark Supreme Court decision that established segregation in public schools as unconstitutional. In 1954, after appeals on the district and state level, the case was brought to the Supreme Court, where justices unanimously ruled in favor of Brown, stating that all public schools needed to desegregate with all deliberate speed. In order to understand the decision made in Brown v. Board of Education, we first have to examine the case Plessy v. Ferguson, the Supreme Court case that set the precedent that was eventually overturned in Brown v. Board. In 1892, Homer Plessy, a mixed-race American, attempted to challenge segregation laws by traveling in a train car designated whites only. He was arrested for violating segregation laws, but he and his lawyers felt that this was unconstitutional. He sued the state of Louisiana, and when Judge John Ferguson ruled against him, he appealed the decision, taking the case against Ferguson all the way to the Supreme Court. Plessy's lawyer argued that the enforcement of segregation laws violated the 13th and 14th Amendments. When the case was presented before the Supreme Court, the court ruled 7-1 against Plessy, stating that because conditions were separate but equal, segregation laws obeyed the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, which states that a state government cannot deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. The precedent of separate but equal set in this case was used to defend Jim Crow laws and enforce the practice of segregation.
Oliver Brown filed a class action suit against the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas in 1951, after his daughter Linda Brown was denied entrance to Topeka's all-white elementary school. Brown v. Board of Education of Topeka was a landmark 1954 Supreme Court case in which the justices ruled unanimously that racial segregation of children in public schools was unconstitutional and ruled that all schools needed to desegregate with all deliberate speed. Supreme Court Justice Earl Warren delivered the unanimous ruling in which he determined that state-sanctioned segregation of public schools was a violation of the 14th Amendment and was therefore unconstitutional. Brown v. Board of Education was a major push forward during the Civil Rights Movement. This case helped show how the idea and law of separate but equal was in fact not equal. Although this was a major step forward in the Civil Rights Movement, it would spark up a lot of new racial issues due to the white resistance to desegregate and due to the sudden change from all white and black schools to a mix of races and ethnicities within these schools.
Even though the Supreme Court ruled segregation in schools is unconstitutional, the way in which the problem was to be resolved was quite vague. The schools were told to desegregate with all deliberate speed. However, many southern schools use this vague terminology as a way to put off the desegregation of schools. The ruling of the case also caused much uproar among the white community, as it was seen as a threat to white supremacy. The ruling led to the strategy of massive resistance and the creation of the Southern Manifesto. The manifesto was issued by Southern congressmen, and it declared that they, quote-unquote, pledge ourselves to use all lawful means to bring about a reverse of this decision, which is contrary to the Constitution, and to prevent the use of force in its implementation. Even with the constant legal actions from civil lawyers, the Southern resistance did not back down. However, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 outlawed discrimination based on race, color, religion, and sex. The Civil Rights Act helped to slowly speed up the process of desegregation in public schools. However, even with all the positives and benefits of desegregation, there were also many negatives, such as how the African American children that were beginning to attend the white schools had to suffer through many hardships, such as harassment and also just blatant racism. However, the children and also the parents that had to go through these tough situations were able to recognize that the new schools that they were going to, the predominantly white schools, had better resources and better funding compared to the African American schools that they were forced to go to before the Supreme Court ruling.
The Brown v. Board court case established that schools could not be segregated. Segregation of schools was ruled unconstitutional to the Board v. Brown case, but it was ineffective in the way that the phrase from the case, all deliberate speed, did not specify a time frame and therefore did not encourage schools to desegregate quickly. The impact of Brown v. Board was that it unanimously outlawed segregation in schools.